At the beginning of a Hebrew year, on the 14th day of the month of Aviv, is the Passover. A Hebraic month begins with the sighting of the first visible sliver of the moon, after the days which the moon is no longer visible at night. The sighting of the first visible sliver is called the new moon, the beginning of the month. A Hebraic day and hour depends upon the movements and the positions of the sun, moon, and stars. For this reason, though the night portion and the daylight portion of a day are both divided into 12 time periods for a total of 24, the actual length of a night hour and a daylight hour will fluctuate during the course of a year. During the night, the observer would watch the position of the stars to determine the hour, and during daylight, they would watch the position of the sun, or the position of the ascending or descending shadow on a sundial. This is also why one Hebraic day ends and a new day begins with the setting of the sun. In the evening hours before nightfall, as the sun was making its descent to drop below the horizon, the people would get ready to watch for the appearance of the new moon, as a new day was also approaching. The Passover is the start of a series of great feast days, known as the Moadim or appointed times, in addition to the observance of the weekly Sabbath day. The Passover is of central importance in the Torah, since proper timing for all other feast days are dependent upon accurately sighting the new moon of Aviv. The Passover sacrifice is alluded to in the book of Bereshit, Genesis, in the 3rd chapter, 15th verse, and would play a primary role in Yahuwah's plan to redeem mankind after Satan had caused their fall in the Garden of Eden. There is also foreshadowing of the Passover sacrifice in the story of Abraham and Yitzhak, as this story helps to emotionally illustrate the gravity of how far Yahuwah was willing to go to save mankind. Those that guard the Torah understand the importance of the Passover and the festival of unleavened bread. However, there is confusion over the meaning of idioms and terms used such as between the evenings, evening, and at the going down of the sun. This confusion has led to debates over what time the Pesach was to be sacrificed on the 14th day. Some believe that it took place at the start of the 14th day and was to be sacrificed during the twilight period after the sun had set, ending the 13th day of Aviv. Others believe, as I do, that the Passover was to be sacrificed during the last 4 hours of daylight on the 14th, starting at the 9th hour when the shadow on the sundial would have clearly been in its descent phase. Let us start with the basics and turn to the book of Bereshit, Genesis, chapter 1, verse 5. And Elohim called the light day, and the darkness he called night. And there came to be evening, and there came to be morning, one day. Timekeeping in the ancient world differs from how we keep modern time. In the ancient world, the counting of the hours of a new day began at sunset, not 12 midnight, and were numbered 1 through 12. The first hour of night began at sunset, and the last hour of night, the 12th, ended with sunrise, beginning the first hour of daylight until the 12th hour, completing the day and beginning a new one at sunset again. The length of these hours were seasonal, fluctuating in length during the course of a year, unlike our modern and rigid standard hour. Yet there were and are a total of 24 hours in a day. They were counted 1 through 12, starting over at 1 at sunset and sunrise, not counted from 1 through 24 consecutively. Turning to the book of Yohanan, John, chapter 11, verses 9 through 12, we can see Yahusha illustrating this idea in the verse. Yahusha answered, "Are there not 12 hours in the day? If anyone walks in the day, he does not stumble, because he sees the light of this world. But if anyone walks in the night, he stumbles, because the light is not in him." If you took notice of the narrative of Yahushua's crucifixion in the book of Mark, the course of events is broken down by time. First thing in the morning, the chief priest had a council meeting and decided to hand Yahushua over to Pilate. At the third hour, they impaled him. From the 6th until the 9th hour, darkness came over the land. And at the 9th hour, Yahushua cries out with a loud voice and gives up his spirit. From here, they hurry to take him down, wrap him in linen, and place his body inside a tomb nearby, because the high Sabbath of the 15th, the first day of Matzah, was approaching. By understanding that Yahushua's death was to serve as the Passover sacrifice, and that the Passover lamb was to be slaughtered between the evenings, the timeline of his crucifixion and death point to the proper time of day on the 14th that the Passover was to be sacrificed. But before we explore this idea any further, let us define the term evening. The Merriam-Webster Online Dictionary defines the term evening as the last part of the day and the early part of night. The term evening has a dual meaning depending upon the context in which it is used. It can mean nighttime, but it can also be referring to the last 4 hours of daylight before nightfall. Here are a few examples from Scripture where evening is used to refer to the last hours of daylight. In the book of Mark, chapter 15, verses 42 to 43. And when evening had come, because it was the preparation day, that is, the day before the Sabbath, Joseph of Ramathaim, a prominent council member who was himself waiting for the reign of Elohim, came boldly and went in to Pilate to ask for the body of Yahushua. Yahushua died at the 9th hour, during the daylight hours on the 14th day of Aviv. And here they are saying that it was evening, though the sun had not set. Also, in chapter 20 of the book of Yohanan, John, comparing verses 1 and 19, we find again the term evening being used to refer to the last portion of the day before sunset. Verse 1, and on day 1 of the week, Miriam from Magdala came early to the tomb while it was still dark, and saw that the stone had been removed from the tomb. And verse 19, when therefore it was evening on that day, day 1 of the week, and when the doors were shut where the taught ones met for fear of the Yahudim, Yahushua came and stood in the midst and said to them, peace to you. Now let us look at the phrase at the going down of the sun. The phrase at the going down of the sun is not the same as saying sunset. This phrase is referring to the sun's path in the sky after it has passed the morning and midday hours. When the sun rises in the east, an ascending shadow is cast on the western side of the sundial. Once the sun passes midday, a descending shadow is cast on the eastern side of the sundial. At this point, the sun is descending or going down. Let us look at an example from Scripture in the book of Yeshayahu, Isaiah chapter 38, verse 8. See, I'm bringing the shadow on the sundial which has gone down with the sun on the sundial of Oz 10 degrees backward, and the sun returned 10 degrees on the dial by which it had gone down. Now let us pull this all together. We know that a complete day begins with evening and is followed by morning. Using this terminology from the book of Bereshit, Genesis, implies that the idiom between the evenings is referring to the daylight portion of a complete day, since it rests between two evenings, that is, its own evening and the evening of the following day. We can see the context meant here, and the use of the word evenings is referring to the night portion of a day. The daylight portion of a typical day is divided into 3 parts: the morning hours, the midday hours, and the evening hours. The phrase, in the evening at the going down of the sun, is pointing directly to the last 4 hours of a complete day, as of the time of the sacrifice of the Passover lamb. Reading carefully in the book of Shemot, Exodus chapter 12, verses 6 through 8, we find that the command was to kill the lamb between the evenings on the 14th day and to eat it that night, that is, the night of the 15th, the first day of unleavened bread. They would have already started baking the loaves of unleavened bread during the evening of the 14th, but slaughtering and cooking a whole lamb with all of its entrails would take anywhere from 4 to 7 hours, depending on weather conditions and fire temperature, before the lamb would be ready to eat. This would place them into the night of the 15th, the first day of unleavened bread, and the night Yahuwah passed over them to smite the Egyptians. Pharaoh arose sometime after midnight and sent word to Moshe and Aaron that they were free to leave.